Come January 3rd, 2017, transit riders in Ontario's capital city will face their second fare increase in less than a year. It's not expected to generate enough revenue to cover the Toronto Transit Commission's budget shortfall, and it's also projected to cost them more than 1 million riders who won't like or can't afford the price hike. Andy Byford is Chief Executive Officer of the TTC, and he joins us now to explain how it all adds up. It's nice to have you in that chair finally.
Thank you.
You've been on the job for what, 4 years now?
I know, 5 actually. My 5-year anniversary of joining the TTC, not as CEO, but joining initially as the Chief Operating Officer, was the 1st of November. So it's gone in a flash.
Happy anniversary, and nice to finally have you in that chair. Starting next year, we point out it's going to be 10 cents more per token, $1.50 more for a weekly pass, $4.75 more for a monthly Metro pass. First question's obvious. Why is the fare increase necessary?
Sure. Well, it was we didn't want to do it. It was with some reluctance that we are now asking our customers again to fund part of the gap that we face in our budget. So, put very simply, the TTC derives its funds from 2 sources: from revenue through the fare box and from subsidy through the city, what the city can afford. And what many people don't realise is the TTC is the lowest subsidised transit system in North America. So although the city does a great job, it's only the city that subsidises. Once upon a time, the province used to give us 50-50 funding. So the difference between the cost base of the TTC, what it costs to run the service day to day, and what the city can afford to give us through subsidy, can only come from one other place. Well, from operational savings, obviously, and we try to be as thrifty as possible. But the only other option is to increase fares. And this year, we faced particularly strong cost pressures. The opening pressure on the TTC budget was $231 million. Why? Because our cost base went up with various cost pressures. Ridership was slightly less than we forecast, so that's less revenue. But also the city subsidy was required to be cut by 2.6%. So it's been the toughest budget challenge of my tenure, and we're not through it yet.
What percentage of your operating revenue comes from the fare box itself?
70%, which is almost unheard of. Now, you may know, Steve, that I previously used to work in Sydney in Australia, and interestingly, that was the exact inverse of what we have here. Here, TTC covers 70% of its operating costs through the fare box, and the remaining 30% is made up through subsidy. In Railcorp, where I previously worked in Sydney, it was the exact opposite, 70% subsidy. Most US transit systems and most Canadian transit systems receive subsidy of around $1.50, $2, even $2.50 per rider. The much maligned TTC has to make do with 90 cents per rider. So I would argue, and clearly there's lots of improvement that needs to be made, I would actually argue that for the money the TTC receives, it works miracles in providing service 24/7 every day.
I was telling you before we went on, I used to cover the TTC. It was part of my beat. We're going more than 30 years ago. And the fact is, it was like that back then, too. For some reason, senior levels of government have never wanted to subsidize the TTC's operations more, despite the fact that others around the world have done so. Sure. Why do you think that is?
I mean, at the end of the day, transit is an expensive business, not least because it's very labour intensive. You know, you need to have lots of vehicles, and the infrastructure to support transit is inherently expensive. Track, signals, vehicles, cables, drainage, pumps, it all adds up, and it constantly needs to be maintained to keep it in a state of good repair. So I guess in a world where there's lots of other pressures, Toronto community housing, emergency services, transit is just in the pecking order. What I would say is that transit is the lifeblood of this city, and you know, the TTC keeps Toronto moving. And if Toronto is successful, Ontario is successful, Canada's successful. So to me, it's a complete no-brainer. We must invest more in the TTC.
But when people spend more, they expect more.
They do.
Are they going to get more for what they're spending?
Well, I would argue they already are. In my tenure at the TTC for the last 5 years, the reason I came here, and I gave up a very nice job in Sydney in order to come here. The reason I wanted to come here was I wanted to be part of the team that turns around the TTC. Good system, you know, basically a good system, but it somewhat lost its way. It was somewhat stuck in the 1970s, I think most people would say. It needed a top-to-bottom modernization, and that's what we're working on. Infrastructure, processes, and the prevailing culture. So what are we doing? We're renewing the whole streetcar fleet, 204 brand new state-of-the-art, low-floor, fully accessible air-conditioned streetcars. We're extending the subway up to York Region. You wait till you see it. It is spectacular. It'll open at the end of next year. We're replacing the signalling system on Line 1, not with light for light, but with a new signalling system that will enable us to run more trains safely closer together. We're rolling out Presto, a new way to pay, which gets rid of, finally, tokens, tickets, transfers, passes.
Taken longer, though, than you hoped.
Longer than we hope, but it will be at the end of this year. Every vehicle and every station will have at least one entrance covered. So it's getting there. It's on the horizon. And in the meantime, huge amounts of work being done on culture change and on upgrading the basic infrastructure of the TTC, including next year. We just got approval to buy 280 new buses. So lots happening for your money.
Fair enough, but we get 6 inches of snow on the ground in the capital city, and somehow the TTC, I don't want to say falls apart, but you know what happens. Why are we so vulnerable still to all of that?
Because for basically 2 decades, 20 years, the TTC was basically left untouched. So we're now reaping the disbenefit of that. So it falls to my team and I to fix decades of underinvestment. So, I mean, that, at the end of the day, that shouldn't have happened this morning. And generally, the TTC is pretty good at coping with adverse weather. It appears that was an old cable that was somewhat compromised, passed a visual inspection, but salty water from thawing snow got into that cable.
Okay, but the bigger question is, why are we so far behind?
Why are we so far behind? Quite simply because we left it under-invested and basically not modernised for 20 years. So we're now playing catch-up. So it falls to my team and I to take the difficult decisions, the unpopular decisions, the tough decisions that people don't like. They don't like being on shuttle buses when we close the subway, plan closures practically every weekend. Why are we doing it? I know it's not popular because it's the right thing to do. Every night we get about 2.5 hours time to maintain the system. That's not enough to replace track and to replace signalling systems. So I think, unpopular though it is, when in 5 years' time this system has been completely modernised, people will look back and say, we might not have liked it at the time, but Byford and Co did the right thing.
No, I hear you. And in fact, I mean, you have put much more of an accent on customer satisfaction than any of your predecessors that I can recall, and you've got kudos for doing that. Having said that, after, I think, some uptick in customer satisfaction, it went down 10% between the second and third quarters.
For a specific reason.
Go ahead, tell me.
So it's a specific reason. So I'm disappointed by that. I wasn't surprised by that, but we predicted it would happen. It was all completely related, almost certainly related, completely related to the problems we had with air conditioning on Line 2, Bloor-Danforth, over last summer. So a particularly hot summer, something like 35 heat alert days in a row, very humid weather, overwhelmed the now 20-year-old's air conditioning system on, not all, around 20% of the cars on Line 2. So understandably, our customers weren't too happy about being rammed into hot carriages. So it was only about 20% of the carriages that the aircon wasn't working. But I guess what it would say is it proves the case that customer satisfaction statistics and surveys are in fact valid. Had that figure not gone down, I think our critics would have been saying, there you go, these are made up statistics. We'll get that figure back.
You've clearly made the case that the TTC needs more money to do what it does. You've got new subway coming on, you've got new LRTs coming on, more smart track stations coming on. Has there been any thought to figuring out private-public partnerships whereby you can reap more revenue by, I don't know what, renting out parts of these stations or doing stuff? I don't know what, you tell me.
Sure, so we are looking at what I would call secondary revenue. So it's less of a public-private partnership. I mean, you could do a PPP through that, but definitely we're interested in using third parties for what I would call non-core business. So, you know, we just launched an online shop. We're not doing it. It's selling merchandise to raise money to, even in a small measure, to cut the need for fare increases, but it doesn't cost us anything. We're having a third party do it. But we are looking at our whole non-primary revenue strategy. And a good example of that, and another example of what you're getting for your money, and another another example of TTC modernization is by the end of next year, in fact, more likely the first quarter of next year, so certainly next year, we will have Wi-Fi fitted to all TTC stations. That's not costing the TTC money, that's making the TTC money, because we went into partnership with BAI Canada, and for a substantial fee over a number of years, they're paying us to put their system into stations. They make money through adverts. We are able to provide our customers with a service. So to me, that's a win-win.
And it will really work?
Absolutely, it'll work. It's already working on around 30 stations.
It sometimes works, yeah.
Well, we're getting there. I mean, it will be in all stations by next year. And for that, we get paid handsomely. So that's a good example of where we're being imaginative and not just going with a begging bowl to government, but going out to look for other sources of revenue.
Okay. One of the pluses of the TTC is, in the eyes of some others, a minus. Namely, if you want to hop on the subway and go 2 stops, it's $3 plus, what is it now, 3.25?
Yeah.
Okay, it's 3.25.
3.25.
Or if you want to go from southwestern Etobicoke to northeastern Scarborough, it's 3.25.
Yeah.
It's the same price. Has there been, I mean, once it gets completely automated and you go to a Presto card, so all you got to do is tap and you don't have to fumble for change anymore, is there any thinking to making the fee determinant on how far you go?
Well, there's early discussion about that. There's certainly not been any decision made. It's an option for the future. And there's really 2 schools of thought, Steve. There's those people that say, now, hang on a minute, that guy who lives at college and goes to, or I say I live at college and go to Union, why do I have to pay the same amount as someone coming in all the way from Scarborough? So that argument's often put to us. But equally, there's the argument from the person coming in from Scarborough saying, well, hang on a second, you've got way more transit options living at college than I have out here. So there's a social equity argument that's kind of the balance or the counter. Presto, once Presto is fully in, and it'll be fully in by middle of next year, bar a few additional machines that we need to get from our colleagues at Metrolinx, that could, if we wanted to, that could be the enabler for a zone or a distance-based system.
Do you want to?
It's an option. It wouldn't be TTC staff that decide that. It would be a board decision, and it would be taken in conjunction with our partners at Metrolinx. Why? Because it would be part of a greater GTHA fare integration solution.
Okay, you're doing something new that has never been done before in the history of the TTC, namely building a subway from Toronto that actually goes up to a different region outside Toronto. We're talking about the Vaughan subway extension, up past York University and so on. It's supposed to open by the end of next year, right?
Correct.
How on time or on budget is it or isn't it?
It's on time and it's on budget. Now, obviously, for full transparency, that's the revised schedule and the revised budget, but we will open it at the end of next year and within the additional budget that was secured. I think if I look back on my career to date, the best professional decision of my career was to bring in Bechtel, who are our partners, to help us get it across the line, because it seemed to me when I stepped in to take action just a year and a half ago, that project was heading for 2018, maybe even 2019. We will have it open by the end of 2017. And here's the pitch. You wait till you see it. These are stunning state-of-the-art architectural stations, 6 of them. 8.6 kilometers of track. And so what we will end up with is a Wi-Fi, Presto, automatic train control, new signaled, stunning subway extension. You wait till you see it.
I'm sure it's going to be gorgeous, but how much more did it cost than originally anticipated?
Well, the budget had to be increased by $400 million because of the fact that we encountered a myriad of problems, some of which went back to the inception of that project, the fact that the designs were changed, the station designs were changed at a very late stage. There's been some issues with contractor performance. There was a fatality, tragically a contractor fatality that shut the project down for nearly 6 months, right back at and then sort of the middle of the project. So there's been a number of reasons. I'm focused on the future. The key thing for me is to get it open. It will open end of next year.
I'm sure. Well, I'm not sure actually. I'm taking your word for it in that case. Where do you get the extra $400 million from?
That was secured via Toronto City Council and York Region. So it's done on a 60-40 split. 60% of that additional amount was borne from Toronto taxpayers, and 40% from York Region. Not something that we wanted to do, but at the end of the day, because the project was going to run an extra year, we had to have money to settle claims. You always get claims in any big construction project, but also because of the on-cost of running the project for another year.
And what did the Commission learn by virtue of everything that did go wrong with that project so that it won't repeat that next time out?
Well, there are lessons to be learned, and partly I'd say one of the lessons learned is to get the funding fully secured at the start of the project so there's not a delay with funding. Bear in mind that back at the start of the TTC's inception, the TTC was ready to go, but was held up for nearly a year and a half because funding wasn't in place. There was a lot of toing and froing with station designs. So there are lessons to be learned. The only point I would also make is, everyone piles on the TTC because a number of projects, not all, a number of projects have exceeded budget and schedule. That's not unique to the TTC. There are plenty of other examples in this city. So the learning exercise has to be borne by all major departments in this city. Otherwise, we'll keep making the same mistakes.
It must feel on some days like you are just the focus of everybody's anger. Mm-hmm. And I guess part of that is that the City of Toronto is hugely dependent on your system to get around, to get to work,
Absolutely.
To get home, and so on and so forth. What is it, 450 million trips a year?
No,
like
540.
540, okay, my dyslexia was kicking in there. I had it the other way around. That's an astonishing number of trips that people depend on the system for. And I guess, they care, and therefore they wonder whether you're best positioned to keep the system going into the future, or whether we ought to give Metrolinx, for example, with a more regional view towards things, the right to be responsible for future building. What do you think?
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, the TTC as it is today, I'm going to repeat it, I maintain for the money we get is performing miracles. The challenge is, it's nothing to do with ownership. It's to do with the fact that we're playing catch up. We have 60-year-old signals and track. We have streetcars that are held together with duct tape. If Metrolinx took over tomorrow, how are they going to fix that? So it's not a question of ownership. I think the TTC is a hugely capable organisation. The issue for me is getting back to a state of good repair, and we're progressively doing that with the unpopular but necessary closures that we've undertaken in order to upgrade infrastructure, and then to work with Metrolinx on expanding the system. But job one is to keep the existing system going.
Let me finish up on this. The former mayor of Toronto, David Miller, got something called Transit City passed.
Yeah.
And then he left office and Mayor Rob Ford came in, and Rob Ford had a different view, and they got rid of Transit City, they put something else in. And then Rob Ford left office and John Tory came in, and we have a new system yet again, Smart Track, and we've got one-stop subway for Scarborough instead of whatever it was supposed to be, three-stop with then, anyway, and subways replacing LRTs. You're the guy who has to sort of follow the puck on all this, and yet it seems every time there's an election in this city, there's a different plan. How frustrating is that for you?
It's intensely frustrating, and it's one of the reasons why I'm laser focused on really 3 issues right now. Get Presto in, get automatic train control beginning to kick in, the new signalling from next fall, which will happen, and get the Spadina extension open. Laser focus on those 3 things. Why? Primarily because they're within my control. But having said that, the good news is that after all this toing and froing with various projects, the one thing I think everyone agrees on in this city, and my customers certainly tell me this every day, I use the TTC every day, I rely on it. Everyone knows, the politicians know that do nothing is not an option. It's time to stop talking and get building. So I do think that more than ever, actually, crosstowns coming together, Line 5 will open in 2021. I think the relief line will happen, and that's certainly a priority for the TTC. And the good news is work is progressing at a pace on developing Smart Track and the Scarborough subway. So I think finally everyone gets it. The proof in the pudding will be, will spades go in the ground?
The crosstown is going right near this studio. It's going to pass us. Can you tell right now whether it's on time and on budget?
Well, that's a Metrolinx project, remember, but I meet with them regularly because obviously we're not passive observers. We will have interchange stations, so we need to work with Metrolinx to make sure that that happens. I met with them just 2 weeks ago, and they reported all the tunnels are done. They're starting work on the stations, and they're saying it's still on time for 2021.
How much longer do you want to hang around in this job?
Well, sometimes that's not up to you. There's a series of photos of my predecessors, 6 of them, in our head office, and it's uncanny how many have either had enough after 5 or 6 years or got rid of after that time. So no, I really enjoy it, Steve.
How long's the contract?
I'm not on a contract. I'm
Okay.
a permanent employee. And people often ask me that, but I'm a permanent employee. So perverse though it may seem, and it does have its frustrations, I really enjoy what I do. I'm proud of the TTC. I'm super proud of the 14,000 men and women at the TTC. And I'm also stubborn and I'm tenacious. And I'm determined to prove some of our critics wrong and to get the TTC back to being #1 in North America. So watch this space. Next year, I'm saying, will be the biggest year in the history of the TTC as we bring in signaling, bring in Presto, get that subway extension open.
We wish you well with your efforts.
Thank you.
That's Andy Byford, CEO, TTC.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit TVO.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.